believe that. There's fact counter that. Bring that to the surface.
And Major, we were talking earlier in this hour about how this isn't the first general election debate of this cycle, but it is the first between these two candidates. There are so many things that have happened since the last debate. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how much you think tonight's debate matters in terms of kind of where voters are. And I'm thinking of that in the context of this fact checking, especially because our polling shows that people are wanting to hear more from Kamala Harris about her policies because they're not as familiar with her as they are about Donald Trump.
How could they be? They're only in the last few weeks evaluating her as the Democratic nominee, as the potential next president of the United States. And the Harris campaign has lots of fundraising, lots of sizzle, lots of energy, lots of volunteers. But a good portion of the American public in the battleground states, according to our surveys and other surveys, want to know more. What is your vision? How does it relate to my life? How is it going to improve my life? What's your explanation for things I'm unhappy with, whether that's inflation, immigration, crime, or something else? And who are you? All of those things are going to come up tonight in a fresh new way because this is the first time, and as we just said earlier, possibly the only time you're going to see this one-on-one clash of visions, records, and rhetoric. And when there needs to be fact-checking for either candidate, myself and the CBS News confirmed team will be there in service to our viewers.
And I can think of no better team to do it. Major, thank you for leading that charge, and we'll check in with you again soon. Thank you. And that does it for me tonight. CBS News special coverage of the first presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former
more town halls. Morgan had been covering her for so many years.
Yeah, I think this is a strategy I would expect. I would also say her campaign would probably argue she's done a lot of unscripted stuff. She does a lot of every city that she travels to go do a rally. She ends up stopping by a local business, having a little interaction, and those interactions are going mega viral for them on social media.
And maybe don't get covered enough by the other press, right?
Exactly. So I think they think what they're doing is working. I would love to interview. I'm sure plenty of journalists would love to see her talking more about her policies, talking more in depth. The CNN interview was helpful, but there's still a lot left to be talked about.
Don, you got the last word here. 30 seconds left. What's the one piece of advice you give Vice President Harris?
Run your race. It's not about the opponent tonight. You've got one opportunity to introduce yourself and have a direct conversation with the American people. And then you can have all the town halls and interviews you want after this. But this is your night. Go out there and kill it. Make him irrelevant. And that will get under his skin more than anything else she could do.
Don, Krisha, and Shira, we thank you all for being here. That's going to do it for this hour of our special coverage of the presidential debate. We are just moments away from that debate starting and our special coverage. I'm Tom Young.
Tonight, the presidential race gets up close and personal.
Vice President Harris and former President Trump meet in person for the first time ever, and it's on the debate stage.
Our special coverage starts right now.
He needs to show that people who were concerned about his age and his ability. That did not happen tonight.
There are at least some House Democrats talking to the White House about having him step down.
If you want to really see something that said, take a look at what happened.
We are coming on the air. Shots have rung out at a rally where President Trump was addressing the crowd.
People just hit the ground. We jumped beneath our elevated stage. It was a chaotic moment.
Remarkable to see the 45th president of the United States walking on the floor of the convention after being grazed by a bullet.
There was its running mate, J.D. Vance.
President Trump represents America's last best hope.
We will press forward, and together we will win, win, win.
While this convention is unified, the Democratic Party is divided.
The president's under pressure to drop out of the 2024 race.
Another twist in what has already been a historic election cycle. President Biden says he will end his re-election bid.
I decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
America, hope is making a comeback.
A hell of a lot can change in 4 weeks.
Our campaign, this campaign, is a fight for.
And we will make America great again.
This is a CBS News special, America Decides, the presidential debate. Now reporting, Norah O'Donnell.
Good evening, and we are just an hour away from what could be the only debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. And what makes this night even more historic is that this will be the first time these two presidential candidates have ever met. That's right. Tonight will be Trump's 7th general election presidential debate, the most of any candidate in the modern era. For Vice President Harris, it will be her first and by far longest unscripted setting during her campaign. If anyone had any doubt about the importance of these debates, that was answered following June's face-off between Trump and Biden. It was considered such a disaster for President Biden that he dropped out of the race less than a month later. So fast forward to tonight. The stakes are high for both candidates with just 56 days until Election Day. We've got an amazing political team here in the studio to discuss what's ahead. But first, let's go right to the debate site in Philadelphia. Senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang covers the Harris campaign. And Weijia, what have you learned about how the vice president is preparing for tonight?
Nora, it is great to be with all of you. And we know that the vice president has really approached this as a diligent student. She has been poring over materials with close aides. That includes studying the previous 6 presidential debates of former President Trump's and consulting with Hillary Clinton, who, of course, was on the other end of 3 of those debates. And she's been practicing with a stand-in for Trump, who was a Clinton aide who was even dressing the part. And before she arrived here in Philadelphia last night, she was holed up in a Pittsburgh hotel doing these extended mock debate sessions. And her team even built a stage with bright lights to replicate the environment that she would face tonight. And she wants to focus on policy over personality. And we know that she has had a lot of policy meetings so that she can condense her answers into swift 2-minute messages, since that will be her time limit. And we know that part of the strategy, Nora, is that she really wants to needle Trump. She wants to try to rattle him and get under his skin. And on the flip side of that, she's been practicing dealing with potential personal attacks. And aides tell me it's really important to Harris to try to remain unbothered and calm. But she has another challenge tonight, too, because more than a third of voters in key battleground states polling say they still don't know what she stands for. So she'll be focused on that as well. And her team says, this is not about fact-checking Trump, but she will be prepared, Nora, tonight to call out any lies from him.
Weijia Jiang in Philadelphia tonight. Weijia, thank you. CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa is also at the debate site. And Robert, I know you have been in touch with the Trump campaign. And so how has the former president said he prepared for tonight?
Great to be with you. There haven't been these kind of prep sessions that's happening over on the Harris campaign side. Sources close to former President Trump tell me he's been playing some golf. He's been staying loose. He's been having casual discussions with his aides. And when they say to former President Trump, she's going to try to prosecute you on stage tonight, he has dismissed it. He's laughed it off. He believes he can make her own her policies and President Biden's policies tonight. And that regardless of her strategy, regardless of her prep, he's going to have a reactive approach tonight, watching to see her method, trying to interpret what she's trying to accomplish, and counter it as someone who has been in the public eye for a half century, as a celebrity, a real estate developer, ultimately as president, and now again as candidate. This is a real test, though, for former President Trump. Yes, he's been on this kind of stage before, but can he expand his coalition tonight? Can he reassure some of those traditional Republicans? Think about former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, saying she's endorsing Vice President Harris. Can he make an overture not only to independents and centrists, but to Republicans as well? I'm told he's going to focus especially on the border, talk about crime, talk about border security, and talk about the economy. Those issues the Trump campaign believes ultimately will decide this election.
Robert Costa, also in Philadelphia for us tonight. Robert, thank you very much. And tonight will no doubt be the biggest audience of this election cycle. Let's bring in our chief political analyst, John Dickerson. John, how do you think what happens tonight could change the dynamics of this race?
Well, you know, campaigns can be kind of silly, but debates are an escape from that if the voters choose to look at them that way. I mean, they are the most formal moment for voters to look at these two people and say, can they handle this job? And we have the sad anniversary tomorrow of the attacks of 9/11, which remind us how seriously the presidency can get very quickly. And you think about, there have been terrorist attacks, pandemics, there have been 2 financial shocks in the last two out of the last 3 presidencies. It is a job of high stakes challenges. And that's what voters can do when they look at the candidates, in addition to the ongoing challenges in America. The road to opportunity isn't what it once was. Climate change. The budget deficit is getting larger. So which of these 2 candidates has the judgment, the temperament, the character? It's a chance for voters to actually take the measure and say, can they do this very difficult, very serious job?
Not only do the hardest job in the world, but be commander-in-chief.
All those nuclear weapons, troops in more than 150 countries. Yes, exactly. The minute they lower that hand after they take the oath of office, they have the most power at their disposal, and it's all on their shoulders.
Want to bring in our Face the Nation moderator, Margaret Brennan. And Margaret, the other thing about tonight, too, though, is voters want the candidate of change. We've got a former president. We've got someone who's been vice president. How do they each position themselves to voters who say, I want something different?
Well, that's the challenge here, because former President Trump has been campaigning on this idea that the vice president would simply be a continuation of Joe Biden's first term. And when we look at our CBS polling of key battleground states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, you can see in that data that Trump is winning the argument when it comes to the candidate who's perceived to bring change to the country. You can see those numbers right there on your screen. And Vice President Harris is a sharp contrast to the 78-year-old challenger in style and in substance. But this is an abbreviated campaign. She is in many ways just defining her platform issues to the public. And so within that, how do you decide to describe yourself as a change candidate when you're the incumbent defending the policies of the administration you're still serving under? That is the challenge. Certainly, we have seen she's more comfortable talking about things like reproductive health care, far more so than Joe Biden ever was. But she's really carved out the smallest of policy differences with him so far, even on those key issues like the economy, which we see in our polling is the defining issue here. So how do both of these known entities reintroduce themselves in a way that excites people about this campaign?
That's why it's so exciting to watch what is ahead, certainly tonight. Nancy Cordes, you are our chief White House correspondent. And as we've been talking about, this recent CBS News poll shows that more than a third of voters in battleground states say they don't know what Kamala Harris stands for. In Pennsylvania, it's 40%. How does that affect tonight?
Right. And a lot of those voters who say they don't know much about her are Republicans, but there are independents there, too. And she needs to win those independents over. And that's why campaign officials tell me that she's not going to spend the night getting into tiffs with Donald Trump. She's not going to take the bait every time, because she needs to spend time talking about herself, talking about her policies, talking about her vision for the country. And frankly, she doesn't need to spend time defining him and calling him out every time. He's been in 17 debates over the last 3 presidential election cycles, when you count primary debates as well. The electorate knows him. And so that doesn't mean that she's going to ignore him. It just means she's going to pick her battles tonight. And I had one aide tell me something interesting today, Nora. She said that part of proving to voters that they should trust her to take on world leaders is proving that she can take on Donald Trump first. And so that is a hurdle she needs to get over tonight.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. I want to bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. The other dynamic tonight is this is happening in Pennsylvania, one of these 7 crucial battleground states.
The biggest one of them all, 19 electoral votes up for grabs. And you've seen both candidates spend more time in Pennsylvania as candidates than any other, because they understand to win Pennsylvania makes it much easier for either of them to win. That's why, for example, one of the first things the Harris team signaled when she became the presumed nominee was that, oh, that position I took on fracking back in the day where I was opposed to it, that's no longer the case. Turns out I've learned as vice president that, in fact, you can frack and still address climate change in other ways. It's why you're seeing members of the Democratic and Republican Party saying both of these candidates tonight need to focus on bread and butter issues like the economy, how to deal with inflation, yes, to some extent, how to deal with reproductive rights. Because who do you win Pennsylvania with? You win it with women in the suburbs. You win it with those independent voters across the state who are eager to hear from both of them on the issues, not these personality clashes and attacks that could come. Republicans I've spoken to today, very nervous that if he gets himself into another slugfest with his opponent, it could set lasting impressions with about 56 days to go with that handful of voters who might have been inclined to support him if he could only focus on issues instead of personality.
And when you say slugfest, you mean a slugfest with gendered terms like he has done in the past by calling Hillary Clinton a nasty woman. He has called Kamala Harris dumb. He's leveled a bunch of other insults at her.
Any and all of that would be seen as a non-starter for that handful, that small handful of potential swing voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, everywhere else, but especially Pennsylvania tonight.
I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. And Major, we've covered a number of these debates together, and you hear allies close to Trump saying, focus on the policy, not the personal stuff that Ed was just talking about. But in many cases, Donald Trump can't help himself.
Often he can't. But the emphasis in the pre-debate preparation for the president to focus on the issues, stay there. That is your safest, most resilient lane. But there's something worth observing about this debate. There are three candidates on stage: Harris, Trump, and expectations. The expectations are pretty well baked in for former President Trump. People know what to expect. They're looking in to find out what exactly Kamala Harris will say and do. What will her mannerisms be toward former President Trump? Can she stand up to him? Will there be these gendered, subtextual jibes? This isn't 2016. The nation is in a different place. It processes gendered slights differently than it did in 2016. The Trump campaign knows that. They've counseled the former president on that. They're urging him to avoid that because they can see it as a huge trap. One other thing. As for the former president, they had a session on Sunday, described to me not as a debate prep, but a bull session. They were lobbing all the hardest questions and jibes they could think from Kamala Harris at former President Trump. He batted them casually away. They felt very good after that. They took the entire Monday off. We'll see if that was a good idea.
All right. That's interesting, Major Garrett. Thank you. Let's bring in CBS News contributor Ed Gordon. Ed, you had one of those last interviews with President Biden before he dropped out of the race. What are you looking for tonight?
Well, that's the interesting thing. She's got to figure out how to stay true to Joe Biden, keep her part of the administration with the idea of charting her own course now. That's going to be difficult in some areas, i.e. the economy, let's suggest. She also has to understand that she's only playing to a very small sliver of voters tonight. Most people have decided she is not looking for someone who is going to either vote for her or Donald Trump. She's trying to move people who have suggested, give me a reason to vote for you. And that's really what it's about today for her.
And what about her background and her experience? A lot of people have talked about this is the prosecutor versus the convicted felon. She was, of course, in the debate club at Howard University. What about her background?
Again, a fine line she's got to walk. A lot of people have suggested because Trump's been on this particular stage 7 times, they're acting as if she is a true novice. I think we saw what she can do and handle during the DNC. There are a number of people. I was with some large fundraisers over the weekend, and their suggestion is if she comes close to the performance she had at the DNC, they'll be very pleased with what they'll be able to bring in and garner after tonight.
She has already outraised Donald Trump 3-1 in this last cycle. Ed Gordon, thank you so much. We also want to talk about the rules tonight, because that is part of the dynamic. The presidential debate is hosted by ABC and the network, and both of the candidates agreed to these following rules. The debate will run 90 minutes with 2 breaks. There will be no opening statements. Each candidate's mic will be muted when it's not their turn to speak. Closing statements are 2 minutes, and once again, there's no audience. Now, there was a virtual coin flip that took place earlier this month. Trump's campaign won. And the toss there, since he won, well, he chose to have the final closing statement. The Harris campaign chose to stand the vice president at the right lectern. The other interesting thing that was talked about, you may have heard, was this controversy over the microphones. Nancy Cordes, explain what was that about? Why was this such a big deal?
Right. It seems like such a trivial element, right? The problem for Kamala Harris is that back when this was the Biden campaign, Biden's aides chose to strike a deal with the Trump campaign that whoever was not speaking in the debates would have their microphone turned off. And that's because
in 2020 it got out of control.
It was a slugfest.
Yeah.
They were talking over each other. Joe Biden, a little bit hard of hearing. So if he's being talked over, he's not necessarily going to hear what Trump is saying or what the moderators are saying. And so that was the agreement. Now Harris is the nominee. And she'd love to have the mic up the whole time. First of all, because the campaign thinks that one of her strongest moments in her vice presidential debate in 2020 was when she was there with Mike Pence. And he was talking over her and she said, "Excuse me, I'm speaking." Mm-hmm. And it's a quick way to show dominance. But if you can't hear him because he's speaking out of turn, then what's the point? And so Trump said he was for it. Harris said she was for having the mics turned up. But Trump campaign officials were not for it. They knew exactly the trap that they were walking into, so that they wouldn't budge. And so the rules have not changed. The microphones will be down for whoever is not speaking.
I mean, how do you think it changes things? Because we are in a period now, John, where, and CBS has an upcoming debate, the vice presidential debate. The moderators are there to moderate the conversation, not to fact check the candidates. It's the onus of each of the candidates to fact check one another. When the mics are dead, how do you quickly fact check someone?
Well, can I just answer another question first, Nora, which is
no.
I will sit here and mute. No, we're talking about, and this also Major touched on this, the things that Donald Trump's campaign is having to get him to do to restrain himself for a brief 90-minute period of time so that he can behave like an adult. That's extraordinary. We will see evidence of temperament in the 90 minutes, but that is an evidence of temperament as well, which is that he is the kind of person that requires mics to be cut off, thoroughgoing instructions not to stray down multiple garden paths. That tells us something about the presidency. You need a calm temperament for that job. So we've learned something before the debate has even taken place. But back to your point, and it's a very important one, Nora, in the age of multiple falsehoods and misinformation, it is the candidate's job to fact check, but it's also our job when we're not moderating. You will be, so you won't for the vice presidential, but it's all of our jobs to fact check. And it's the American people's job to say, wait a minute, I'm going to decide that a person who tells too many lies is not fit for a job where honesty is crucial, because you might have a pandemic. And when the pandemic comes, what they say will inform my choices and may, in fact, affect my life. So, maybe I'm going to value that a little bit more highly.
It will be part of the dynamic, certainly tonight, these guardrails that are in place because the microphones will not be turned on when the other person is speaking. It's an excellent point. All right, ahead, the path to the White House, how each campaign could get to the magic number of 270 electoral votes.
I had progressively
President Trump. Yes, he's been on this kind of stage before, but can he expand, especially on the border? Talk about crime, talk about border security, and talk about the economy. Those issues the Trump campaign believes ultimately will decide this election.
Robert Costa, also in Philadelphia for us tonight. Robert, thank you very much. And tonight will no doubt be the biggest audience of this election cycle. Let's bring in our chief political analyst, John Dickerson. John, how do you think what happens tonight could change the dynamics of this race?
Well, campaigns can be kind of silly, but debates are an escape from that if the voters choose to look at them that way. I mean, they are the most formal moment for voters to look at these two people and say, can they handle this job? And we have the sad anniversary tomorrow of the attacks of 9/11, which remind us how seriously the presidency can get very quickly. And you think about, there have been terrorist attacks, pandemics, there have been two financial shocks in the last two out of the last three presidencies. It is a job of high stakes challenges. And that's what voters can do when they look at the candidates, in addition to the ongoing challenges in America. The road to opportunity isn't what it once was. Climate change, the budget deficit is getting larger. So which of these two candidates has the judgment, the temperament, the character? It's a chance for voters to actually take the measure and say, can they do this very difficult, very serious job?
Not only do the hardest job in the world, but be commander in chief.
All those nuclear weapons, troops in more than 150 countries. Yes, exactly. The minute they lower that hand after they take the oath of office, they have the most power at their disposal, and it's all on their shoulders.
Want to bring in our Face the Nation moderator, Margaret Brennan. And Margaret, the other thing about tonight, too, though, is voters want the candidate of change. We've got a former president. We've got someone who's been vice president. How do they each position themselves to voters who say, I want something different?
Well, that's the challenge here, because former President Trump has been campaigning on this idea that the vice president would simply be a continuation of Joe Biden's first term. And when we look at our CBS polling of key battleground states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, you can see in that data that Trump is winning the argument when it comes to the candidate who is perceived to bring change to the country. You can see those numbers right there on your screen. And Vice President Harris is a sharp contrast to the 78-year-old challenger in style and in substance. But this is an abbreviated campaign. She is in many ways just defining her platform issues to the public. And so within that, how do you decide to describe yourself as a change candidate when you're the incumbent defending the policies of the administration you're still serving under? That is the challenge. Certainly, we have seen she's more comfortable talking about things like reproductive health care, far more so than Joe Biden ever was. But she's really carved out the smallest of policy differences with him so far, even on those key issues like the economy, which we see in our polling is the defining issue here. So how do both of these known entities reintroduce themselves in a way that excites people about this campaign?
That's why it's so exciting to watch what is ahead. Certainly tonight, Nancy Cordes, you are our chief White House correspondent. And as we've been talking about, this recent CBS News poll shows that more than a third of voters in battleground states say they don't know what Kamala Harris stands for. In Pennsylvania, it's 40%. How does that affect tonight?
Right. And a lot of those voters who say they don't know much about her are Republicans, but there are independents there, too. And she needs to win those independents over. And that's why campaign officials tell me that she's not going to spend the night getting into tiffs with Donald Trump. She's not going to take the bait every time because she needs to spend time talking about herself, talking about her policies, talking about her vision for the country. And frankly, she doesn't need to spend time defining him and calling him out every time. He's been in 17 debates over the last 3 presidential election cycles, when you count primary debates as well. The electorate knows him. And so that doesn't mean that she's going to ignore him. It just means she's going to pick her battles tonight. And I had one aide tell me something interesting today, Nora. She said that part of proving to voters that they should trust her to take on world leaders is proving that she can take on Donald Trump first. And so that is a hurdle she needs to get over tonight.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. Want to bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. The other dynamic tonight is this is happening in Pennsylvania, one of these 7 crucial battleground states.
The biggest one of them all, 19 electoral votes up for grabs. And you've seen both candidates spend more time in Pennsylvania as candidates than any other because they understand to win Pennsylvania makes it much easier for either of them to win. That's why, for example, one of the first things the Harris team signaled when she became the presumed nominee was that, oh, that position I took on fracking back in the day where I was opposed to it, that's no longer the case. Turns out I've learned as vice president that, in fact, you can frack and still address climate change in other ways. It's why you're seeing members of the Democratic and Republican Party saying both of these candidates tonight need to focus on butter issues like the economy, how to deal with inflation. Yes, to some extent, how to deal with reproductive rights, because who do you win Pennsylvania with? You win it with women in the suburbs.
And also holds on to Nevada. That also gets her over 275. Now for Trump, and this shows you also just how pivotal Pennsylvania can be. Here's a hypothetical for him. He wins Pennsylvania, let's suppose, like he did in 2016, and then he could hold North Carolina like he did last time. And if he were to flip Georgia back into his column, that gets Trump to 270. So those are just some of the scenarios that could play out. But the big story is, in a race this close, every vote, every state starts to matter, Nora.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. And of course, those battleground states, those 7 states could not play a more important role. So let's turn now to Major Garrett. He's got to look at where the campaigns have focused their time. Hi there, Major.
Hi, Nora. Anthony loves maps and numbers. I love maps and numbers. This map, though, no numbers, only blobs. But I love blobs, okay, folks? I love the blobs, too. All right, very simply, travel during this 2024 campaign in blue, that's where the Democratic ticket has gone. Red, that's where the Republican has gone. The gray blob, I told you I love the blobs, both. Guess what, folks? All the blobs are in the battleground states. Hello, that's exactly right. Look at the blobbiest state of all. No disrespect, Pennsylvania. God love you, the Commonwealth. More blobs than anyone else. Republicans and Democrats are going to and have been descending on Pennsylvania. Same thing with Michigan, Wisconsin. Interestingly, North Carolina. Nora, 75 days ago, after that first debate, the Trump campaign thought North Carolina was done and dusted, over. Not anymore. They're spending a lot of time there, and of course, Nevada and Arizona. These blobs are not just representative of the thing that candidates value most, their time and their rallies and their exposure. They're also indicative of campaign ad spending, digital and television and radio. They're also indicative of offices for the campaigns, volunteers, door knocking, all the fundamentals in campaigns. So wherever you see blobs, that's where the campaigns are most active. And a word of warning. If you're an undecided voter in any of these blob states, to use a football term, have your head on a swivel. You are likely to be tackled walking into the grocery store by one of these two campaigns.
It's an excellent point. And of those 7 battleground states, Trump only won North Carolina in the last election. So it's a competitive again this year, but leans Republican at this point. But
narrowly, very narrowly.
Very narrowly. Major Garrett, thank you so much. Let's turn to another big policy issue this election cycle, and that is reproductive rights. The issue of abortion kept Democrats competitive in the 2022 midterms, and it is helping boost Vice President Harris today. Take a look at this new CBS News poll. It finds Harris leads Trump by a wide margin among those in the battleground states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin who say abortion is a major factor in their vote. Those are the 3 states that you will hear us refer to as the blue wall that Democrats have to win in order to win the presidency. Margaret, what about this issue of reproductive rights and abortion rights that Kamala Harris is likely going to hammer Donald Trump on tonight?
She will, because even before she was the nominee, it was Vice President Harris's job to prosecute this part of the case. The abortion issue is something Joe Biden said he personally felt uncomfortable discussing. So she was the one on the college campuses out there talking and trying to rally support for people concerned about access to all sorts of reproductive health care. We know that in 9 to 10 states, depending how you calculate this, abortion initiatives will be on the ballot themselves. So that may lead to turnout, and that could actually help in states like Arizona and Nevada, where you will see it. There are places like New York where Democrats are talking about other initiatives also being related to abortion and hoping it boosts turnout. That's the cynical political take. She will make the argument that this is simply about freedom. I mean, even to her walk-on song, she is driving home that message that it is about choice rather than having to be about the procedure itself. So it's a case she can uniquely make. And she certainly says to Donald Trump, you put those justices on the court who struck down Roe versus Wade.
We talked about that message that we all watched during the Democratic National Convention, where you saw the Democratic Party try and embrace the ideals of freedom. freedom to make your own reproductive choice. As the vice presidential candidate, Governor Walz says, mind your own damn business, as he says. It relates to a number of things for him on this particular case, talking about reproductive rights. How do you see that playing out, Nancy?
I think Harris is definitely going to bring it up tonight if the moderators don't. The Harris campaign assumes that there will be a question to Donald Trump about abortion. But regardless, she's going to bring it up because he's kind of been all over the map. He's been claiming lately that he isn't anti-abortion. And he has staked out a number of different policy positions on this issue. So she is going to want to set the record straight and make the case that she and she alone is the candidate for reproductive rights.
Well, what about that? Because certainly, if we reach way back into Donald Trump's life, he donated to Planned Parenthood and other so-called pro-choice or pro-abortion rights groups. Then he moved forward and appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court. He proudly says, I helped overturn Roe versus Wade. But now that this issue has become so dominant in so many states, we heard stunningly Donald Trump announce that he was going to have the government pay for IVF fertility treatment.
He's been fishtailing on this issue, and I think that's partially because he's been a little bit at sea since Harris became the nominee. And so this was one of his many different gambits to try to find a comfortable place in handling her candidacy. But I think the larger question, which will be so interesting, is on this question of freedom. Because if the campaign is about who's going to be thinking about me when they're in the Oval Office, well, the conversation here is for women, who's going to be thinking about me and my choices and autonomy over my own body? But Harris is making a larger claim, which is I will be thinking about you when I'm in the Oval Office, and these kinds of decisions have to be made. And so if she can prosecute the case and make it more broad, it feeds into her larger, biggest, really campaign argument, which is I'll be thinking about you, he'll be thinking of himself, and that will keep him from thinking about you, and things will happen which will not work for you.
But, you know, John, one of the things that on this issue is so tricky for Donald Trump is also what it does within the dynamics of the conservative movement. Mike Pence, this former vice president, came out against him and his candidacy specifically on the issue of abortion. He said we're where he drew the line, not January 6th. Which was an interesting position to stake out, but it underscores that there is a part of the conservative movement, particularly evangelical Christians, who aren't comfortable with the fishtailing you talked about, nor the fact that in the Republican National Committee agenda that was set this year, abortion was largely removed. There was
7 core battleground states. And again, poll average here, the average of the major polls in those states right now. And you see the headline, obviously, these are very close margins. Look, Harris, 1/10 of 1 point in the North Carolina average right now. Trump by a half a point in Georgia. These are very, very close. Although you take a look and you see one here that's a little different. That's Wisconsin. Harris on average just 4 points ahead right now. Keep in mind, Wisconsin, the source of the single biggest polling miss in 2020. It had Joe Biden well ahead, nearly 10 points on average. He won the state by less than 1 point. The polling here was way off in 2016 as well. There was a pretty big miss in Michigan, too. States with large blue-collar white populations where Trump has run up very big numbers. The polls didn't sufficiently capture that in 16 and 20. Is that going to be different in 2024, or is there more Trump support in some of these states than it appears in the polls? That's a major question to think about as you see more numbers come out. And then you just see in this column right here, the electoral votes. Again, 7 core battleground states. Where's tonight's debate? It is in the state that is first among equals when it comes to battleground states. 19 electoral votes in Pennsylvania, more than any other. What does that mean functionally? If you're one of these campaigns and you lose Pennsylvania, mathematically, if you want to
for Pennsylvania?
That's right, 11:30 Saturday morning in 2020.
Oh my God, but who's counting, right? Okay, well, we shall see. Thank you. That sets it up very nicely for our next guest. What do voters want to hear from candidates tonight? These battleground voters, they're the deciders. Kate Snow is in Pennsylvania talking to those undecided swing voters. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Savannah. Yeah, we're at the Churchville Inn. It's a restaurant in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. That's right outside of Philadelphia. This is a county that really could be pivotal in the state of Pennsylvania. And as Steve was just saying, it could be pivotal. Pennsylvania, as it goes, could be pivotal for the whole election. So we gathered 3 voters with me. They are all undecided voters. Each one of you is registered differently. We have Lynn Kelleher, who's a registered Republican and a realtor here in town. We have Hannah Reed, an independent, a mom of 3. And then we have Andrew Wallace, who's registered Democrat and owns this place, by the way, the owner of the restaurant. What's interesting, though, is you all cannot decide. And Lynn, you told us that you find Trump, I forget your word, reprehensible. You really don't like the guy. But you find Harris, you said that you don't understand what she stands for. She needs to explain. What are you looking for tonight?
For me, the election is a decision between economics and morals. I like some of Trump's economic policies.
Yeah.
I abhor him, quite frankly.
Because of his morals.
Because of his morals or lack thereof. But she, I think, is talking a lot of fluff. She hasn't said anything substantive. I don't know that she has the experience or the wherewithal to lead this country out of the economic situation that we're in.
I'm going to note, all 3 of you voted for Trump in 2016 and then changed in 2020. Hannah, let me go to you. You said you're very frustrated going into this debate. Why?
Because the election itself is no longer about policies. It's no longer about the real issues in this country, like the economics or the inflation.
You don't like the name calling.
The name calling, I mean, the back and forth. It's about who can get one over on the other, to the point that we are not pushing policies through just because the person that put it through was from another party.
And Andrew, let me ask you about your issues, because we were talking earlier. You like some of the things. You're really big on policies that Trump supports, and then you're also really big on policies that Harris supports. You don't know what you're going to do. So what do you need to hear tonight?
I feel left behind by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, Harris received 0 votes. I would have liked to have a say in the primary, and they didn't give me that. I feel that they think that they know what's best for me. Harris hasn't said anything. Harris's policies, a lot of them, have just been stolen from Trump. Taxes on tips, putting up the border wall. She's said absolutely nothing of her own with her own ideas. So I'm waiting to see anything from her that is an original idea and not stolen from the other candidate.
All right, guys, we're going to watch this debate together. And Savannah and Lester, we will certainly report back on sort of what the reactions are here in the room. It's an instant focus group.
Yeah, some important voices to hear. Kate, thanks very much. Let me bring in 2 experts at debate preparation. Greg Craig served as White House counsel in the Obama administration. He prepped John Kerry by playing George W. Bush. And Judd Gregg is a former senator from New Hampshire who prepped George W. Bush by playing John Kerry. And Senator, let me begin with you. You know, the candidates, of
We're
course,
sort of hitting you a tongue tie there.
Yes, it's not easy. The Harris folks really want to put forth her and introduce her to people who don't know a lot about her right now. Is this a good time for any candidate to change who they are, who the viewers and voters perceive them to be?
People can't change themselves. Really, first is your mannerisms, and especially when you have a split screen. If you'll remember when George Bush the first was in the debate, he looked at his watch, and that affected the campaign significantly. And then Al Gore rolled his eyes and made all sorts of facial disparaging types of President Biden just looking like he wasn't there. So the physical.
Harris and Donald Trump, welcome.
Thank you. Well, look, guys, tonight's debate is going to showcase 2 very different visions for America. And we can expect that Donald Trump will come ready to put on a show. This will be his 7th general election debate. That's the most end candidate in modern history. And we know he's been preparing harder than he has before. His constant lies, they're going to make it hard for moderators to fact check him as well. And it's going to make him difficult to prepare for. And his team, his handlers, have insisted on muted microphones to keep him as disciplined as possible. But look, the American people don't want another show. They want a real leader. They will see that in Vice President Harris, that she is fighting to make their lives better by increasing economic opportunity and protecting our freedoms. And then they'll see Donald Trump, a man that tonight, when he's not talking about himself, will be pushing a dark, backwards-looking agenda and is really only focused on himself. So the vice president's ready to debate. She's prepared to share a vision for a new way forward for our country, one that finally turns the page on Trump's chaos and division. But before we do that, let's not forget just how bad Trump's time in office actually was. Trump's first term cost the country millions of jobs, left us on the brink of a recession, and gave massive handouts to billionaires and big corporations. He, in his own words, proudly overturned Roe v. Wade and ripped away reproductive freedom from millions of Americans. He fawned over dictators and alienated our allies, and he tried to overturn the 2020 election in a desperate attempt to hold on to power. But make no mistake, when we talk about this election, we have to remind ourselves what he'll do if he gets the chance again. He wants to purge the government of anyone not sufficiently loyal and replace them with MAGA loyalists who will empower him to rule as a dictator on day one. Those who worked closest with Trump warn he should never be president again. But that's not where he stops. Let's just take a look at the full plan, his Project 2025 agenda. He's going to eliminate the independence of the Department of Justice. That will give Trump unprecedented control and unchecked power. He will ban abortion nationwide, restricting access to contraception and IVF, and forcing states to even report on a woman's miscarriage or abortion. He will put Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block and end the Affordable Care Act. He will gut the Department of Education and all funding for K-12 education. Then we got the tax breaks for billionaires and big corporations. He's going to make working families foot the bill. His plans, in his own words, what he said in Battleground, North Carolina, would increase costs by $4,000 a year by slapping a Trump sales tax on goods that families rely on. We're talking gas, we're talking food, clothing, medicine, everyday goods. America has seen the damage Trump inflicted, and we are not going back. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are fighting for a new way forward. And you know, Vice President Harris has always been a fearless fighter for the American people. As a prosecutor, as Attorney General of the biggest state in the country, as a U.S. Senator, and now as Vice President, she has spent her entire career standing up for everyday Americans against predators, scammers, and powerful interests. As Vice President, she helped deliver historic progress across the country. And now she's running to chart a new way forward, one that protects reproductive freedoms, strengthens our democracy, ensures that every person has the opportunity to not just get by, but to get ahead. So the choice is going to be incredibly clear tonight. The Harris-Walz ticket will always put the American people first. And Donald Trump will always put his own interest.
Nodding and shaking and disagreeing, but we know what we need to listen for. All right, folks, we're now going to check in on one of our watch parties in the vice president's hometown of Oakland, California. Wow, it looks like everyone in Oakland is ready for this debate. Thank you all for your support tonight. Yes, let's go Oakland. Folks, we're going to be right back with more from HQ right after this quick break.
The way to deal with that is to ask follow-up questions, make sure you're getting answers to the questions that you ask.
It's also a question for the candidates. And there is a question of how much tonight, as we bring it back to what we're going to see in just about 11 minutes from now, is how much will Vice President Harris fact check former President Trump and vice versa, although it is clear, we know from past debates, that the former president does say things that are not true on this stage. I've talked to people in her orbit who say if she spent the night fact checking, in their view, she'd never get anything else in. So she's got to pick her moments in that space. We're also seeing, even as we've been on the air tonight, former President Trump already, his campaign, his team, kind of working the refs here already, preemptively going after the moderators. It's always a factor.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's not terribly recent, but I remember it's in the last 10, 15 years, it's become a lot more common to attack the moderator. I remember when you would never see the candidates go out and go after the moderator. I remember Newt Gingrich doing it in a Republican primary, I think in 2016 or something like that. And that was different.
Well, two things. You've got to feel the room. And it took me several minutes to feel the room, feel the temperature of the candidates. The other thing is, having done a lot of debates, including a presidential debate, I swore a long time ago I would never publicly judge a debate moderator.
That's right.
It is an incredibly difficult job, and my hat's off to anyone who has done it.
Absolutely. And you try to tune out any criticism that you might be getting heading into the big night.
But you know exactly what their stomachs feel like.
I
10
sure
minutes
do.
away from the debate now.
I'm starting to feel as
I
bad as
know,
myself.
having moments of feeling for them.
Thanks for all this. This was great. We'll take a break. We're less than 10 minutes away from the big moment as Kamala Harris and Donald Trump get ready to face off and meet for the first time ever. I hope you can stay with us. It's going to be quite a...
We are ready for President Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
We are now joined by Soumya Narachenya, my dear friend, Deputy Battleground Director for the Harris campaign, who's going to share our pathway to 270. Welcome, Soumya.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me. I love that
Of
we're
course.
matching.
I got it.
Very great. Folks, as you know, President Harris and Governor Walz remain the clear underdogs in this race. The 2020 election was decided by a razor-thin margin of just 40,000 votes. And you can expect that this election will be no different. But we are prepared. This campaign has been building on the ground infrastructure. We have 312 coordinated offices and over 2,000 coordinated staff across our battleground states. Close contact. And it's going to be historic in Harris's fundraising month in presidential history. Nearly 3 million donors gave, and almost half of them were first-time donors who 2020. These resources are being put to immediate use with efforts like weekend, during which volunteers just like you knocked on more than 216,000 doors and contacted more than 1.4 million voters across all of our battleground states. And by the way, we also had a 370 million paid media campaign running. Our candidates, Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, as well as some of our top surrogates, are crisscrossing key states all over the country. Forward. Later this week, the Vice President will barnstorm North Carolina and will also be back in Pennsylvania. Governor Walz will visit Wisconsin and Michigan. Ahead of that, tonight's debate will be a key opportunity for the American people to see in prime time why Vice President Harris is the best choice in this election.
She absolutely is.
people want to be led into the future, not dragged back to another era.
And Reince, I want your thoughts on, you've also prepped Donald Trump for debates back in 2016, I believe. What Donald Trump do you think we'll see tonight? Can he be disciplined?
Well, he certainly can be. I mean, the reality is Donald Trump doesn't have a lot to lose tonight. I mean, his support has always been almost unmovable. So the second piece is the honeymoon, I think, is over for Kamala Harris. And you all kind of touched on it with Donna. Kamala Harris has to answer for the state of the economy that she took a role in the Biden administration, the border, her past positions on decriminalizing the border, decriminalizing certain drugs, what her role was in Afghanistan. So really, the spotlight is on Kamala Harris tonight because she played a role in the Biden administration. She wants to act like she's not an incumbent. So this is where the focus is going to be. And she's got a lot to answer for tonight. And I think that's where Donald Trump's focus will be and where it actually should be tonight.
Well, one of the things he wants to do is have female voters look at him. How does he attract female voters after saying things about Kamala Harris? And we'll see how he pronounces that tonight. Things he said about Kamala Harris, that she's dumb as a rock. That's not really going to attract female voters, is it?
Yeah, no, it won't. But I also think that just like he did in the first debate against Joe Biden, I think the formula here is to constantly tie Kamala Harris to the Biden administration, which is where Trump is winning against her on the economy, inflation, and all these other problems that we're having, and then sit back and let her talk. Let her explain herself, her past positions, current positions. How does she feel about how Biden has done on the economy? How does she feel about the border? Well, then turn it over and let her talk.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us tonight, Donna and Reince. We're all staying tuned. Can't wait.
And I have to say, as we are just less than 2 minutes away, this such an extraordinary moment, and especially, Rachel, when you consider that these two people that have been the center of our lives for the last 2 months have never met each other.
Have never even met each other. And Harris said, if you got something to say it to my face. The question tonight, does Donald Trump actually go there? He's questioned her racial identity. He's questioned her intelligence as well, or does he stick to the issues?
Look, this is the largest audience they're likely going to have in this race. It will be interesting to see if Harris can make clear the stark choice before voters. And where does she decide to land her punches? She can punch hard. Can she do that while rising above the needling coming her way? But first and foremost, are we going to see a handshake when the two of them meet for the first time?
We didn't back in 2016 when I did that debate. We'll stand by to see that tonight. But the first time, side to side, together.
And I have my doubts that we're going to see that handshake, but what we are going to see is a spirited debate and perhaps the most consequential general election debate we have ever seen, because almost certainly going to be the last one. So with the stakes so high, the presidential debate just moments away, we have the entire news division keeping an eye on everything. We're going to be fact-checking on our live blog. It's all going to be happening right here. The debate now just 10 seconds away, and we will be back with our post-game show as soon as it's over. We are going to toss it right now to David Muir and Lindsay Day.
Tonight, the high-stakes showdown here in Philadelphia between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Their first face-to-face meeting in this presidential election, their first face-to-face meeting ever.
A historic race for president upended just weeks ago. President Biden withdrawing after his last debate. Donald Trump now up against a new opponent.
The candidates separated by the smallest of margins, essentially tied in the polls nationally and in the key battlegrounds, including right here in Pennsylvania, all still very much in play. The ABC News presidential debate starts right now.
This is an ABC News special. The most consequential moment of this campaign, Kamala Harris.
You know what?
We'll chart a new way forward. Donald Trump.
You're quite hostile. You're quite hostile. You're quite hostile. You're quite hostile.
Historic. The ABC News presidential debate. Here now, David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
That's when I smack the shit out you. I smack the shit out. That's when.
I'm David Muir, and thank you for joining us for tonight's ABC News presidential debate. We want to welcome viewers watching on ABC and around the world tonight. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump are just moments away from taking the stage in this unprecedented race for president.
And I'm Lindsay Davis. Tonight's meeting could be the most consequential event of their campaigns, with Election Day now less than 2 months away. For Vice President Kamala Harris, this is her first debate since President Biden withdrew from the race on July 21st. Of course, that decision followed his debate against President Donald Trump in June. Since then, this race has taken on an entirely new dynamic.
And that brings us to the rules of tonight's debate. 90 minutes with 2 commercial breaks. No topics or questions have been shared with the campaigns. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer questions, and this is the clock. That's what they'll be seeing. 2 minutes for rebuttals and 1 minute for follow-ups, clarifications, or responses. Their microphones will only be turned on when it's their turn to speak. No pre-written notes allowed. There is no audience here tonight in this hall at the National Constitution Center. This is an intimate setting for 2 candidates who have never met.
President Trump won the coin toss. He chose to deliver the final closing statement of the evening. Vice President Harris selected the podium to the right.
So let's now welcome the candidates to the stage. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
Have fun.
Thank you.
Welcome to you both. It's wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight.
Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their #1 issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Vice President Harris, you and President Trump were elected 4 years ago, and your opponent on the stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid, and I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to startup small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year, because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from
prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums. And they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that she and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality, and we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
We are going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but I would like to let Vice President Harris respond on the economy here.
Well, I would love to. Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess. What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook, a bunch of lies, grievances, and name calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. I believe very strongly that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together, knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us. And I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans.
President Trump will give you a minute.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas. I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before. We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic, and the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died. Anything like it. We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic. We handed them over a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We made ventilators for the entire world. We got gowns, we got masks, we did things that nobody thought possible. And people give me credit for rebuilding the military. They give me credit for a lot of things. Not enough credit for the great job we did with the pandemic. But the only jobs they got were bounce back jobs. These were jobs bounced back, and it bounced back and it went to their benefit. But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond.
So Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America. What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse. Mine would strengthen the economy. What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. 16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession. You just have to look at where we are and where we stand on the issues. And I'd invite you to know that Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
It's just a soundbite. I gave her that to say. Look, I went to the Wharton School of Finance, and many of those professors, the top professors, think my plan is a brilliant plan. It's a great plan. It's a plan that's going to bring up our worth, our value as a country. It's going to make people want to be able to go and work and create jobs and create a lot of good, solid money for our country. And just to finish off, she doesn't have a plan. She copied Biden's plan. And it's like 4 sentences, like run, spot, run. 4 sentences that are just, oh, we'll try and lower taxes. She doesn't have a plan. Take a look at her plan. She doesn't have a plan.
Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars, and so were other countries. And, you know, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration. We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else. The people of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy. And all you have to do is look at a poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
Vice President Harris, I do want to ask for your response, and you heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out, when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century, which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having on the short end of the stick in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. Thank you, President Xi, exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump, I'll let you respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. And it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21. That's bigger than New York State pouring in. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people coming in are criminals. And that's bad for our economy, too. You know, you mentioned before, we'll talk about immigration later. Well, bad immigration is the worst thing that can happen to our economy. They have, and she has, destroyed our country with policy that's insane. Almost policy that you'd say they have to hate our country.
President Trump, thank you. Lindsay?
I want to turn to the issue of abortion. President Trump, you've often touted that you were able to kill Roe v. Wade. Last year, you said that you were proud to be the most pro-life president in American history. Then last month, you said that your administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights. In your home state of Florida, you surprised many with regard to your 6-week abortion ban because you initially had said that it was too short. And you said, quote, I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. But then the very next day, you reversed course and said you would vote to support the 6-week ban. Vice President Harris says that women shouldn't trust you on the issue of abortion because you've changed your position so many times. Therefore, why should they trust you?
Well, the reason I'm doing that vote is because the plan is, as you know, the vote is, they have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that. And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me, hence the vote. But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do. Exceptions, very important. But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years. Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened. Now, Ohio, the vote was somewhat liberal. Kansas, the vote was somewhat liberal, much more liberal than people would have thought. But each individual state is voting. It's the vote of the people now. It's not tied up in the federal government. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it. And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Understand, in his Project 2025, there would be a national abortion, a monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages. I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
Thank you, Vice President Harris.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban because we've gotten what everybody wanted. Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else, and every legal scholar wanted it to be brought back into the states. And the states they take a little time. But for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart. And they've wanted it back in the states. And I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came
Well,
to
I
your
won't
desk?
have to because, again, two things. Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote, especially now with the 50-50 and essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote. She can't get the vote. She won't even come close to it. So it's just talk. You know what it reminds me of? When they said they're going to get student loans terminated, and it ended up being a total catastrophe. The student loans, and then her, I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach. But look, her boss went out and said, we'll do it again. We'll do it a different way. And he went out, got rejected again by the Supreme Court. So all these students got taunted with this whole thing about this whole idea and how unfair that would have been. Part of the reason they lost to the millions and millions of people that had to pay off their student loans. They didn't get it for free, but they were saying it's the same way that they talked about that they talk about abortion.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. In all fairness, J.D. And I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. Look, we don't have to discuss it because she'd never be able to get it, just like she couldn't get student loans. They couldn't get student loans. They didn't even come close to getting student loans. They taunted young people and a lot of other people that had loans. They can never get this approved. So it doesn't matter what she says about going to Congress. So wonderful. Let's go to Congress, do it. But the fact is that for years, they wanted to get it out of Congress and out of the federal government. And we did something that everybody said couldn't be done. And now you have a vote of the people on abortion.
Vice President Harris, I want to give you your time to respond, but I do want to ask, would you support any restrictions on a woman's right to an abortion?
I absolutely support reinstating the protections of Roe v. Wade. And as you rightly mentioned, nowhere in America is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. It's insulting to the women of America. And understand what has been happening under Donald Trump's abortion bans. Couples who pray and dream of having a family are being denied IVF treatments. What is happening in our country? Working people, working women who are working 1 or 2 jobs, who can barely afford childcare as it is, have to travel to another state to get on a plane sitting next to strangers to go and get the health care she needs. Barely can afford to do it, and what you are putting her through is unconscionable. And the people of America have not, the majority of Americans believe in a woman's right to make decisions about her own body, and that is why in every state where this issue has been on the ballot, in red and blue states both, the people of America have voted for freedom.
Vice President Harris,
Excuse me, I
thank
have
you.
to respond. Another lie. It's another lie. I have been a leader on IVF, which is fertilization. The IVF, I have been a leader. In fact, when they got a very negative decision on IVF from the Alabama courts, I saw the people of Alabama and the legislature 2 days later voted it in. I've been a leader on it. They know that, and everybody else knows it. I have been a leader on fertilization, IVF. And the other thing, you should ask, will she allow abortion in the 8th month, 9th month, 7th month?
Come on.
Oh, okay, would you do that? Why don't you ask her that question?
Why don't you answer
That's the problem.
question?
Predictions in the 7th month, the 8th month, the 9th
That's
month,
not true.
and probably after birth. Just look at the governor, former governor of Virginia. The governor of Virginia said, we put the baby aside and then we determine what we want to do with the baby.
President Trump, thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill, which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime, trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first. And I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so? That would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border.
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country. And it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country. And if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well,
All
I've
this,
seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for foods. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
but
television.
the people
I'm
on
taking it from
television
the city
saying
manager.
their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield, there's no evidence of that. Vice
We'll
President
find
Harris,
out.
I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme. This is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election, I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a 4-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former secretary of defense has said the nation, the republic, would never survive another Trump term. And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people, not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people who's were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire him. And you take a guy like Esper, he was no good, I fired him. So he writes a book. Another one writes a book, because with me, they can write books. With nobody else can they? But they have done such a poor job, and they never fire anybody. Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any sitting president in history by far.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier. So let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S. military.
Police, yes.
You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah, it is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country. And they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down? You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in, and all over the world, crime is down all over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse
President
me,
Harris,
the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud. Just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich. coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Excuse me. Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people.
Vice President
stop
Harris,
him.
thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy with a fake Russia investigation
We do have a lot
that went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking, because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on longstanding work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, your
Well, first of
response?
all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever. She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish one thing, so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before. When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead. Fossil fuel will be dead. We'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out of. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400, 500 acres of desert
President
soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that we
for the
have to get
environment
to.
that
We're
she
out of time.
understands.
Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar, remember that.
She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, "Oh, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet." That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted? When are these people from countries all over the world, not just South America? They're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world. And crime rates are down all over the world because of it.
But let me just
when
ask
are those, David, when are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle? They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask
you. You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the president of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the president said, the former president said, stand back and stand by. So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say, we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on this. Let's not go back. Let's chart a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse, all of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect. It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this, you talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border? How come she's not doing anything? And I'll tell you what I would do, and I would be very proud to do it. I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border because they have the right to do it. They don't need bills.
They have the right to do it. The president of the United States, you'll get him out of bed. You'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You'll say, come on down to the office. Let's sign a bill. If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed.
Mr.
Those
President,
people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to.
You're quite
This
hostile.
next issue to both
You're
of you,
quite
because it really brings
hostile.
us,
You're quite.
this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
But
You know
those-
that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it. And they should have sent it back to the legislatures for approval. I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president has ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten. The election, people should never be thinking about an election as fraudulent. We need two things. We need walls, and we have to have it. We have to have borders, and we have to have good elections. Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them
No judge
Republican,
looked at it.
and said
They
there was
said
no
we didn't have
widespread fraud.
standing. That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter, because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did in fact lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact. That's deeply troubling, and the American people deserve better.
I'll give you 1 minute to respond, Mr. President.
Let me just say about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man. He's a tough person, smart, Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up? 3 years ago, it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president. They were afraid of him. China was afraid, and I don't like to use the word afraid, but I'm just quoting him. China was afraid of him. North Korea was afraid of him. Look at what's going on with North Korea, by the way. He said Russia was afraid of him. I ended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and Biden put it back on day one, but he ended the XL pipeline. The XL pipeline in our country, he ended that. But he let the Russians build a pipeline going all over Europe and heading into Germany, the biggest pipeline in the world. Look, Viktor Orban said it. He said the most respected, most feared person is Donald Trump. We had no problems when Trump was president. But when this weak, pathetic man that you saw at a debate just a few months ago, that if he weren't in that debate, he'd be running instead of her. She got no votes. He got 14 million votes. What you did, you talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes, and they threw him out of office. And you know what? I'll give you a little secret. He hates her. He can't stand her. But he got 14 million votes. They threw him out. She got 0 votes. And when she ran, she was the first one to leave because she failed. And now she's running. I don't understand it, but I'm okay with it because
your time is
I think
up.
we're going
Thank
to
you.
do very well.
We've got a lot more to get to.
Turning now
Yes.
to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
If I were president, it would have never started. If I were president, Russia would have never, ever, I know Putin very well, he would have never, and there was no threat of it either, by the way, for 4 years, have gone into Ukraine and killed millions of people when you add it up, far worse than people understand what's going on over there. But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they all horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation. And now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast. Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
That's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is very well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy. It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself. It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un. And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear. They can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on
Vice
national
President
security,
Harris.
including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
She's the one that caused it. That's weak on national security by allowing every nation last month for the year, 168 different countries sending people into our country. Their crime rates are way down. Putin endorsed her last week, said, I hope she wins. And I think he meant it because what he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me. The leaders of other countries think that they're weak and incompetent, and they are. They're grossly incompetent. And I just ask one question. Why does Biden go in and kill the Keystone Pipeline and approve the single biggest deal that Russia's ever made, Nord Stream 2, the biggest pipeline anywhere in the world going to Germany and all over Europe? Because they're weak and they're ineffective. And Biden, by the way,
President
gets paid
Trump,
a lot of money.
Thank you. We have a lot of issues to get to.
We'll be right back with much more of this historic ABC News presidential debate from the National Constitution Center right here in Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
The ABC News presidential debate will continue after this.
It was a regular day for 19-year-old Melissa Witt.
She went to meet her mom at a bowling church league, but she never makes it into the bowling alley. My gut knew this was not a young girl who just ran away.
New information and pools of blood were found by detectives.
I'd just love to have her back more than anything in the world.
It is a heart-wrenching day for the family of Melissa Witt.
Police found the body in the Ozark National Forest.
We had several suspects.
All these kinds of leads.
A known serial killer in your area. Could he be involved?
We're actually finding key evidence that could have slipped through the cracks. You're looking for that game-changing piece.
Her last hours on this earth were probably the most horrific a person can experience.
This beautiful young girl. Police will find out what happened.
At Wit's End, the hunt for a killer, only on Hulu.
Baywatch is a fantasy. When you hear that theme song, You're streaming ABC News Live.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
You're part of an operation.
Is this our combat operations center?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in. Thank you.
Ismail? David.
ABC's World News Tonight. David Miller, the most watched newscast. You're watching America's #1 streaming news. Keep streaming with ABC News Live. Live from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here again, David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
Welcome back to this historic ABC News presidential debate tonight. We're going to continue here, and I want to turn to the war in Ukraine. We're now 2.5 years into this conflict. Mr. President, it has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for 250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left. I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of negotiation. Well, it wasn't, because Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III. Don't kid yourself, David. We're playing with World War III. And we have a president that we don't even know if he's, where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they
here.
threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
Your time is up. Just to clarify in the question, do you believe for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris. I want to get your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president, you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to define one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Vice President Harris, thank you. We've heard from both of you on Ukraine tonight. Afghanistan came up in the last hour. I wanted her to respond to something you said earlier, and now, please, I'll give you a minute here.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow. Quiet, please. He would have been sitting in Moscow, much happier than he is right now. But eventually, you know, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't ever talk about that. He's got nuclear weapons. Nobody ever thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening, but he does have that. Something we don't even like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about it. But just so you understand, they sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war because everything they said was weak and stupid. They said the wrong things. That war should have never started. She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin, and she did. And the war started 3 days later. And that's the kind of talent we have with her. She's worse than Biden. In my opinion, I think he's the worst president in the history of our country. She goes down as the worst vice president in the history of our country. But let me tell you something. She is a horrible negotiator. They sent her in to negotiate. As soon as they left, Putin did the invasion.
President Trump, thank you. You did bring up something. You said she went to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. Vice President Harris, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you clarify tonight?
Yet again, I said at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow. And that is another one. When I went to meet with President Zelensky, I've now met with him over 5 times. The reality is it has been about standing as America always should, as a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. And that is very much what is at stake here. The President of the United States is commander-in-chief, and the American people have a right to rely on a president who understands the significance of America's role and responsibility in terms of ensuring that there is stability and ensuring we stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of personal flattery.
We've talked about Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. I do want to talk about Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of this debate. I want to move on to Afghanistan.
Stoltenberg said Trump did the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He got these countries, the 28 countries at the time, to pay up. He said, I've never seen, he's the head of NATO, never seen. For years, we were paying almost all of NATO. We were being ripped off by European nations, both on trade and on NATO. I got them to pay up by saying one of the statements you made before, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you.
President
Otherwise,
Trump.
we would have never gotten it. He said it was one of the most incredible jobs that he's ever seen done.
Thank you. I want to turn to Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of the debate, and we witnessed a poignant moment today on Capitol Hill, honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do want to ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear any responsibility in the way that withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century. But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this. And the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not again appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, your response to her saying that you began the negotiations with the Taliban.
So if you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers. And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul. And for 18 months, we had nobody killed. We did have an agreement negotiated by Mike Pompeo. It was a very good agreement. The reason it was good, we were getting out. We would have been out faster than them, but we wouldn't have lost the soldiers. We wouldn't have left many Americans behind, and we wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind. And just to finish, they blew it. The agreement said you have to do this, and they didn't do it. The agreement was terminated by us because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
I want to move on.
And these people did the worst withdrawal, and in my opinion, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. And by the way, that's why Russia attacked Ukraine, because they saw how incompetent she and her boss are.
President Trump, thank you. I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
Honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was a land. He owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to Black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young Black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first Black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
Vice President Harris, thank you. Lindsay?
President Trump, this is now your 3rd time.
This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country, and they come up with things like what she just said, going back many, many years, when a lot of people, including Mayor Bloomberg, agreed with me on the Central Park 5. They admitted, they said, they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they pled guilty, then they pled, we're not guilty. But this is a person that has to stretch back years, 40, 50 years ago, because there's nothing now. I built one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, and I'm going to build it again. It's going to be bigger, better, and stronger. But they're destroying our economy. They have no idea what a good economy is. Their oil policies, every single policy. And remember this, she is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman, she says. She is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had, a horrible economy because inflation has made it so bad, and she can't get away with that.
Thank you. Your time is up.
I want to respond to that, though. I want to just respond briefly. Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country, one who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people. I believe in what we can do to strengthen our small businesses, which is why I have a plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life to help you in that most critical stage of your child's development. I have a plan that is about allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page.
Vice President
and move
Harris,
forward.
thank you. Let's turn to policy.
President Trump, we have to move on. President Trump.
Let's turn to policy,
She has
please.
a plan to defund the police. She has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
President Trump,
she
we
has
do
a
have to
plan
move
to
on to
not
other
allow
issues.
fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else.
Okay.
That's
you,
what
Mr.
her plan is until just recently.
I just need
Lindsay,
to
go ahead.
respond
President
because
Trump,
the
President
former
Trump.
president has
No,
said
I'm
something
sorry.
twice that I need to
No,
respond to.
I'm sorry. We're
I
going
just
to
need to
move on,
respond
Vice
one
President
time
Harris.
to what he has
President
said
Trump, this
multiple
is now
times.
your
Yes.
3rd time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep Obamacare, quote, unless we can do something much better. Last month, you said, quote, we're working on it. So tonight, 9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan? And can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care, always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it. But remember this, I inherited Obamacare because Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it. They were unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare. But the Democrats came up. They wouldn't vote for it. I had a choice to make when I was president. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, never going to be great, or do I let it rot? And I felt I had an obligation, even though politically it would have been good to just let it rot and let it go away. I decided, and I told my people, the top people, and they're very good people. I have a lot of good people in that administration. We read about the bad ones. We had some real bad ones too, and so do they. They have really bad ones. The difference is they don't get rid of them. But let me just explain. I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing. But it's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better health care than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that. And you'll be hearing about it in the not too distant future.
Vice President Harris, in 2017, you supported Bernie Sanders' proposal to do away with private insurance and create a government-run healthcare system. 2 years later, you proposed a plan that included a private insurance option. What is your plan today?
Well, first of all, I absolutely support, and over the last 4 years as vice president, private healthcare options. But what we need to do is maintain and grow the Affordable Care Act. But I'll get to that, Lindsay. I just need to respond to a previous point that the former president has made. I've made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff. As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. I was a senator at the time when I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate. And the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being, you don't like him, you said at the time, because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching tonight, you remember what that was like? Remember when an insurance company could deny if a child had asthma, if someone was a breast cancer survivor, if a grandparent had diabetes? And thankfully, as I've been vice president and we, over the last 4 years, have strengthened the Affordable Care Act, we have allowed for the first time Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of you, the American people. Donald Trump said he was going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He never did. We did. And now we have capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Since I've been vice president, we have capped the cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000 a year. And when I am president, we will do that for all people, understanding that the value I bring to this is that access to health care
And you know what? we can do much better than Obamacare, much less money. But she won't improve private insurance for people, private medical insurance. That's another thing she doesn't want to give.
President
People
Trump.
are paying privately for insurance that have worked hard and made money, and they want to have private. She wants everybody to be on government insurance where you wait 6 months for an operation that you need immediately.
President Trump, thank you. We have another issue that we'd like to get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you. 1 minute for you each.
Well, the former president had said that climate change is a hoax. And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or it's being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president. We have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. And I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the United Auto Workers and Sean Fain, who also know that part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing and opening up auto plants, not closing them like happened under Donald Trump.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
That didn't happen under Donald Trump. Let me just tell you, they lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs this last month. It's going, they're all leaving. They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China. They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States because of these people. What they have given to China is unbelievable. But we're not going to let that. We'll put tariffs on those cars so they can't come into our country, because they will kill the United Auto Workers and any auto worker, whether it's in Detroit or South Carolina or any other place. What they've done to business and manufacturing in this country is horrible. We have nothing because they refuse. You know, Biden doesn't go after people because supposedly China paid him millions of dollars. He's afraid to do it. Between him and his son, they get all this money from Ukraine. They get all this money from all of these different countries. And then you wonder, why is he so loyal to this one, that one, Ukraine, China? Why is he? Why did he get $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife? Why did she pay him $3.5 million? This is a crooked administration, and they're selling our country down the tubes.
President Trump, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with closing statements from both of our candidates. An historic night, this ABC News presidential debate from Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
The ABC News presidential debate will continue after this.
Baywatch is a fantasy. Baywatch is sexy.
Hvad vil du bruge tiden på? Mere tid til det, du holder af. Nogen satser på eliten. Vi hjælper også bredden. Spar Nord, hele byens bank i 200 år.
Capri Sun, the taste of fun.
Imagine doubling your Instagram followers and engagement without posting more. That's by making one post work as hard as 5. It's possible with comment to DM automation. You can make every comment on your posts start a personalized conversation with your audience right in their DMs.
How hard is it to see it like this?
Our house is no longer here, but we are here.
Now is real.
Let's break down what we know and then the big questions still outstanding.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
We're back with tonight. Kamala Harris and Donald.
For analysis, it's key moments. Our team will break it down. As we enter the final sprint to Election Day, we'll go back to the debate and closing statements.
Live from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here again, David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
Welcome back tonight. The time has come for closing statements, and President Harris, we begin with you.
Thank you. Visions for focus, and the other that is focused on and an attempt to take us backward. But we're not going back. And I do believe that the American people know we all have so much more in common than what separates us. And we can chart a new way forward. And a vision of that includes having a plan, understanding the aspirations, the dreams, the hopes, the ambition of the American people, which is why I intend to create an opportunity economy, investing in small businesses, in new families, in what we can do around protecting seniors, what we can do that is about giving hardworking folks a break and bringing down the cost of living. I believe in what we can do together that is about sustaining America's standing in the world and ensuring that we have the respect that we so rightly deserve, including respecting our military and ensuring we have the most lethal fighting force in the world. I will be a president that will protect our fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. I'll tell you, I started my career as a prosecutor. I was a DA, I was an attorney general, a United States senator, and now vice president. I've only had one client, the people. And I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump?
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful white you want to do, but you haven't done it, and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in. You believe in things like we're not going to frack, we're not going to take fossil fuel, we're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not. Germany tried that, and within 1 year, they were back to building normal vision. But I just ask one simple question. Why didn't she do it? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world, they're laughed. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world. They don't understand what happened to us as a nation. We're not a leader. We don't have any idea what's going on. We have wars going on in the Middle East. We have wars going on with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to end weaponry. I retire military. She gave a lot of it away to the Taliban. She gave it to Afghanistan. What these people have done to our country, and maybe toughest of all, is allowing millions of people to come into our country. Many of them are criminals, and they're destroying our country. The worst president, the worst vice president in the history of our country.
President Trump, thank you. And that is our ABC News presidential debate from here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center. I'm Lindsay Davis.
And I'm David Muir. Thank you for watching here in the U.S. and all over the world, and from all of us here at ABC News.
And welcome back to NBC News coverage of the debate. Pick your adjective. I would go with fiery to begin, but it goes from there. Both executed president's skin, which he did quite often. For the former president, his option was, of course, to go after the economy, after Afghanistan, the administration's position on the withdrawal in Afghanistan, and immigration, of course. This is exactly what they wanted. The question is how they got there, and along the way, I think.
Well, people are going to be talking about this debate for a long time. And is this the final debate? Is this the only one we're going to see? Will there be another? Well, it depends on how each candidate. We have to show you. Let's talk about, first of all, it does seem that she get to was effective.
Well, let's just name a few. Abortion, January 6th. His former officials who are now critical of him. John McCain, which is a big trigger point.
His rally size.
His rally size, one of the biggest ones that gets under his skin. One of his allies said she clearly tried to get under his skin. He's being defensive way too much. He's losing his answers. For example, instead of border are of course that theory didn't do what they were hoping he would do, which is to stay on message, to talk about his strengths. There were some unanswered questions as well. It's worth noting out on both sides whether you differently on immigration. Trump, by the way, didn't answer the critical question. Would he veto a national abortion ban if it came to his desk? I asked J.D. Vance if Trump would do that. He said yes, he would. Trump said tonight, well, he didn't check with me before saying that, to play with those.
Frustration on the part of those allied with Donald Trump about the moderators. That is something that you sometimes hear after debates. I think that is certainly a through line here. There is some frustration, I think, I spoke with one Republican who called former President Trump wild and uncontrolled, and said that the vice president was successfully pushing his buttons and avoiding the issues and going on attack against former President Trump. She did that, as you have laid out. She baited him again and again. We talk about substance and style being the two kind of buckets in any debate. If that's the style, you look at substance here. She was pressed on her shift away from some of those more progressive positions in that crowded primary. She says, my values haven't changed. And it wasn't just, of course, the issue of abortion access and whether he'd veto a national abortion ban that the former president did not answer on. He did not discuss how he would implement one of his central issues on immigration, mass deportations. And he also didn't get in saying, I have concepts of a plan. He will be pressed on that moving forward.
He also didn't commit to saying he wants Ukraine to be victorious in the war. So that was an interesting exchange as well. So she was trying to prosecute the case against him, but also present an affirmative vision of herself and what she So, Tom, I'm sure you're already starting to see people filter in, and what are you hearing?
Yeah. Okay, guys, so it's still very early, right? Each campaign is sort of getting their talking points out and making sure everyone's on the same message before they pour into the spin room. Some people are coming in right now. There's a crush of reporters at the entrance waiting for everybody. I can tell you in the meantime, my phone has been blowing up with both Republican strategists, Democratic strategists, voters. I've been asking everyone what they think. It is a complete different shift change from that first debate. After that first debate, Republicans felt very victorious, very confident. They were saying the entire debate was about Joe Biden. This time, it's much different. Trump, they also felt frustrated with the format of the debate, which is never a good sign on your side. And then also saying that they were able, at least Vice President Kamala Harris was able to make this debate not about Joe Biden, not about herself, but about Donald Trump, and that led to her advantage. So again, many of the surrogates are coming in right now, governors, senators from.
All right, Tom, thanks. Let's bring in Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He's a Democrat representing the Harris campaign. Governor, thank you for being here. Let me first ask you, do you think the voters were served by what we saw the last 90 minutes? Served well, I guess.
Look, I think the voters heard a lot and learned a lot. You know, one of the things I was a little bit worried about going into this debate is that some folks had a little brain fog about Donald Trump. They sort of didn't remember the chaos of Donald Trump's time in office. Well, I'll tell you what, I think Kamala Harris cleared that brain fog out, reminded people of the disaster that he was as president. And I think it was also clear as she was laying out a vision to take this country, Donald Trump didn't have a clear vision on where he wanted to go. Instead, it was more grievance and division, more attacks on other people. And Donald Trump, I think, will make our country less safe, more chaotic, and less free. And Donald Trump prosecuted the heck out of the case tonight. Well, Kamala Harris prosecuted the case tonight. Pardon me.
Oh, against Trump. Gotcha. Okay, got you. You know, I thought Donald Trump toward the end finally got around to what he was hoping to accomplish, which is say, if you have all these plans and you have all this vision, Kamala Harris, you've had 3.5 years to do it. Why haven't you? So what is the answer to that?
She has served as vice president. She knows the job to be president. Now she has laid out her vision for where she wants to take this country. I thought she was very specific on her plans to cut taxes, particularly for small business owners, her way of trying to bring down costs for middle-class families. Donald Trump, I don't know what the heck he thinks. He was all over the place. I think what you heard was a rambling man full of nonsense and full of a whole lot of grievance. He couldn't get past that, and he couldn't focus on anybody but himself, and that is serving the good people of this nation, something Kamala Harris has done throughout her career and has plans to do going forward.
Do you think either will have an appetite for a second debate after this one?
Look, I think that'll be up to either one of them. I'm not going to sit here and guess what'll happen, but I'll tell you what, if there is not another debate, what the American people saw tonight was a clear contrast in steady, future-looking leadership versus the chaotic, divisive leadership of the past of Donald Trump.
Governor Shapiro, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
We're going to hear from Senator Marco Rubio in just a moment. We have a few moments to turn back to our table. So what about it? I mean, it was just, it's clear that the Democrats and the allies of Kamala Harris are very happy with the way that she prosecuted the case against Donald Trump. But we know going in, about 30% of voters were saying, we don't really know who she is or what she's about. Do you think she did enough to define herself to make that affirmative case?
I don't. There were a couple of answers where she talked about her economic plans. It's the top issue. Trump beats her on that point. I think people still have a lot of questions about what she would do on the economy.
One interesting nugget, by our team's count, the former president said the name Biden something like 15 times, didn't say Kamala or Harris once. She addressed that by saying, clearly, I'm not Joe Biden. But I think that's an interesting point, is where the former president's head is at this point.
All right, let's bring in Florida Senator Marco Rubio. He's a surrogate for the Trump campaign. Senator, thanks for coming on to us. Coming on with us. Did we see the best version of Donald Trump, in your opinion, tonight?
Well, two things. Well, no, he was president of the United States. He's been campaigning basically for the last 8 years, 4 years, actually going back to 2016. Most voters didn't even know who Kamala Harris was. Tonight, for the first time, they got glimpses of it. Look, I don't think the moderators did the best job of pressing her on this, but I think got glimpses of what she has stood for as recently as 2019 and 2020. And here in Philadelphia, and here in Pennsylvania, where she wanted to ban fracking. But beyond that, I think there are all kinds of things that the moderators never asked, questions that I wanted to see asked. For example, grocery prices are up 50% from 2020. What is your responsibility for that? I thought her answer on Afghanistan was complete nonsense. She was vice president at the time. Joe Biden didn't withdraw from Afghanistan. We were run out of Afghanistan. So on issue after issue, I think for the first time, voters are starting to get a glimpse of someone and starting to understand the positions that she truly believes in. She's basically cut and paste, literally cut and paste out of the Biden agenda. People don't want the Biden agenda. But what she really believes in are the radical ideas that she ran on in 2019 and 2020. I think for a lot of Americans who don't know a lot about her, tonight they were introduced to those facts. I think that's going to have an impact on this race.
Senator, you just laid out the case against her pretty clearly. Do you wish that Donald Trump had done so more clearly?
Well, I think he did. Unfortunately, like I said, look, I'm not one of these guys that likes to complain about moderators. This one was tough not to. I think it was really one-sided, and some of the fact-checking was wrong. There are, in fact, states in this country, the state of Minnesota, where a child born in a botched abortion is allowed to die, provided palliative care and allowed to die. So some of the fact checking I thought was truly unfair, but on balance, as people heard things about, you wanted to take away guns from people in the past, you wanted the Bernie Sanders health care plan, you wanted to ban fracking, you bailed out, tried to raise money to bail out rioters in 2020 in the summer. These are new facts that a lot of people don't know about Kamala Harris that they learned tonight for the first time. And I think, as you've seen in the polling, a lot of 25% of Americans wanted to learn more about him. They learned more about her tonight.
Senator Rubio, thank you for your time. We want to go to Kate Snow. She's been talking with a group of undecided voters in where else? Battleground, Pennsylvania. Kate, we've all been dying to hear what they thought and how they reacted to what they heard tonight.
Yeah, Savannah, it's been really interesting watching with you all because I could see your reactions in real time. There were a lot of visceral reactions. In one word, if I can ask, how would you headline this debate? One word to describe what you saw, Lynn.
Well, it's 4 words. Same old, same old.
Hannah.
Manipulative.
And Andrew.
Lies on both sides.
Okay.
Lies.
Well, no, you came in all undecided. Has anything changed your mind tonight? Anything you heard here that you thought, oh yeah, I could go for that policy. I could stand with that candidate.
So not really. For me, I think Kamala had a good debate.
Clearly, what to do was be
I
candidate.
feel more favorably towards her than to Donald. I'm still
not sure.
Not 100%.
The two of you women reacted very strongly when Harris was talking about abortion. When both candidates were talking about abortion rights, you reacted strongly to Donald Trump and his positions. You seemed emotional about it, Hannah. Yes. What was your thought on that? What was it about that part of the debate that struck you?
His misinformation. He sensationalized just so much facts or not things that are not facts that have been disproven.
When he was talking
he does it because that is what his supporters want to hear. And it really impacts who people like us, if we choose to vote for him or not, because we know you are lying, but you're still saying it. And it's disgusting.
You all said it was the economy going in. Andrew, anything you heard that changes how you're thinking about their economic policies?
No, because at the end of the day, December and November is going to roll around and they're going to pass. They're going to say, we're going to shut down the government. And they're going to pass an omnibus and they're going to spend trillions of dollars and nothing else is going to change. They're just going to keep spending money uncontrollably. Donald Trump spent $6 trillion in 2019 and added that to our deficit. So absolutely not. They're spending money and then it's coming back into the government, to the congressman, into the Senate through funds, through PACs, through all the disgustingness.
Andrew, thank you so much. Hannah, Lynn, it's great to be with you. I'll send it back to you guys.
All right, Kate, thanks very much. Kristen Welker, Hallie Jackson back for some final thoughts. Kristen, first to you. Will we know who won this debate in days or weeks or months?
Well, a couple of weeks, I would say, once we look at the new poll numbers, Lester. As we've been saying, the Harris campaign feels emboldened. They just put out a statement saying Vice President Harris is ready for a second debate. Is Donald Trump? The big question, will that actually happen? And again, it's just fascinating to hear the voters who are sitting there with Kate Snow to hear that one of them at least feels a little bit more favorably toward Harris.
As we start to close our coverage, I always like to say Election Day is XX days away, but in fact, Election Day is Well, it starts tomorrow in one state, but it's 6 days away in Pennsylvania.
That's right.
Early voting is a huge factor.
Those mail-in ballots going out in Pennsylvania. You've got it in other battleground states as well, coming up soon, including Michigan just this month. So that is for real, right? What's happening tonight matters when people go to make their decision about who they want in the White House. So will there be a second debate? That's an open question. You look at what's next. All four of these leaders, Kamala Harris and her running mate, former President Trump, and his running mate will be in 9/11 ceremonies tomorrow.
All right, Haley. Thanks, Haley. That concludes our coverage of tonight's debate between Vice President Harris and former Trump.
Early. Hey, Lester, hold
it. I heard Donald Trump before this debate describe Kamala Harris as, I'll just read a few of them, a low IQ individual, somebody who doesn't have the mental capacity to be president, really dumb, unable to put two sentences together. Is that what you saw on the stage tonight?
John, what I saw was a lot of slogans. I think the American people are smart, and Kamala Harris talks to them like they're children. She repeats these ridiculous platitudes where if you actually think about what she said, you realize that it doesn't make any sense. She talks a lot about her plans, but then her plans, when you analyze the substance, don't make any sense. And more importantly, John, the American people don't get fed on plans. She has been the vice president for 3.5 years. What she can't do, refuses to do, and has no ability to do is to say, I accomplished lower prices because she didn't, or I accomplished lower housing prices because she didn't, or I secured the southern border because she didn't do that. She has failed as vice president, and the fundamental question is, do we want to give her a promotion? I think the answer has to be no, John.
All right, Senator Vance, thank you for joining us. Mary.
One thing both sides can agree on, this was a consequential night in this race. More reaction when we come back. Stay with us.
Tøj, du faktisk ikke har brug for. Selv på Vinted uden gebyr.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Vance is, he's delusional. This is crazy. She won, Harris won, she won that hands down. She won that whole thing. He rambled and it was just a mess. Yeah, he rambled. Man, I gotta go back in. I gotta come back in. An election hands down. She won the debate. I meant to say she won it. She won. Yep, she did. She won. Anyway, I guess everybody is gonna. She won that debate. Harris won, and I don't think Donald Trump will I don't think he's going to accept a second debate with her. I don't think he should. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he will.
You're going to hear from the same old tired playbook.
Yeah.
Former president battling to win
I don't
the
think
White
he
House.
will.
They had the
U.S.
highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country.
The
Yeah.
vice president running to be the nation's
Dude.
first female president.
It's
People
insulting
like
to the women of
yeah.
America.
Do you think
The
he
other
will?
is unfit to lead the country.
Do you
Donald Trump actually has no
won't
plan
take another? He won't do another debate. He won't do another debate. No, he won't. He will.
Say about me.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people.
And it could determine who wins the White House in November.
People want to take their country back.
I think the choice is clear in this election.
Reporting tonight from the spin room at the presidential debate in Philadelphia, Tom Yamas. And from NBC News Studios in New York, Hallie Jackson.
Hey, good evening. I'm Tom Yamas. Hallie will be joining us in just a moment as you're watching NBC News Now's live coverage of what could be the most consequential night of the 2024 presidential election. You see right through the historic handshake between Vice President Kamala Harris, here it is, and former President Trump. This is actually the first time the two of them ever met, not just on a debate stage, but in person, period. And tempers ran hot tonight with personal attacks just minutes into the hour-and-a-half-long debate. Both sides trying to play to their strengths, like Vice President Harris handling Mr. Trump on reproductive rights.
From what I heard, she wanted him. Yeah, I doubt if Donald will do a second debate with her, because I think his advisors are going to tell him not to, because I think he did poorly. You know, I don't know what anybody else thought, but I think he did. I don't think he did well at all. Nope, I don't think he did well at all in this debate, because he just kept going at the same old things, and the things he said about the pipeline with, that from what I know, and I don't know that much about it, but from what I know, the pipeline was Russian, was Russia's idea. But we'll see if he takes another one. I don't know. We'll do that then.
Let's get right to my NBC News colleagues, Peter Alexander and Garrett Haig, out there in the spin room. Peter covers the Harris campaign, Garrett, the Trump campaign. And Garrett, I want to start with you. Tell me what you're hearing from inside the Trump campaign.
Inside the Trump campaign, they're very confident in how he performed tonight. They think this foreign policy segment was the strongest part of his performance tonight. If you go one layer out, though, the Republicans who advised this campaign, who are rooting for this campaign, they are frustrated. I've been talking to the Republican operatives, including some folks who are involved in the debate preparation for this president, who don't feel like he took advantage of the opportunities that were presented to him. Now, granted, some of them were frustrated about the moderators. They were frustrated about the topics. They're frustrated that Kamala Harris, for example, didn't get asked a direct question about inflation, an issue that they think is one of their strongest issues. But they realized that their guy didn't take advantage of what he was trying to do. All day I was talking to these Trump folks who told me they wanted to make Kamala Harris own the most liberal past positions that she's taken. And really only on the issue of fracking do they feel like they were successful. They just wasn't able to tie her to the things they felt like they needed to tie her to have a clear win tonight.
Are you getting the sense, because I'm getting the sense from the Republicans I'm talking to, it was a shift change when you compare it to the Atlanta debate? Coming out of the Atlanta debate, I mean, they were victorious, they were happy, they were congratulating each other. Here it's much different. There's frustration, there's anger, they're blaming moderators. And I think you're right, with that outside layer, they're frustrated a little bit with former president. Has the former president spoken out yet? Has he posted yet anything on Truth Social?
He's posted two things. One, suggesting that it was a strong debate performance because it was 3-on-1. So his own complaint about the moderators. I expect we'll hear more of that. And he posted a meme of him with AI-generated cats, a nod to that line where he was arguing with the moderator about immigrants eating pets, which I think, just as my own view, feels like somebody who's much more online than millions of viewers here tonight who are probably going to have no idea what he's even referencing. Right. I think that is not the turf that a campaign that wants to be fighting for the middle of the country perhaps wants to be fighting.
We should mention Senator J.D. Vance, the running mate, is somewhere here in the spin room. He's gaggling with reporters. We'll bring you that sound as soon as we have it. I do want to ask you about that moment, though, when the moderators asked former President Trump about something J.D. Vance had said about vetoing a national abortion bill. Talk to me about that moment, because it seemed like the ticket wasn't on the same page.
No, this is really striking. I mean, Donald Trump has had over the course of his career every conceivable position on abortion. Where he has landed now is that he believes it's an issue for the states, and he has used that to avoid taking direct questions about what, if any, federal policy he would take. He has not answered directly about whether he would veto a national abortion ban. But when J.D. Vance was on Meet the Press, I guess 2 weeks ago now, Kristen Welker asked him about this, and he kind of took Trump's position to what a lot of people thought was the logical conclusion. If he doesn't support a ban, yes, I suppose he would veto it. Trump wouldn't go that far tonight. And Tom, that's the second time I can think of off the top of my head where Trump has distanced himself from a sort of Vance projection of a Trump position. Now on abortion, also on the child tax credit, where Vance has proposed a much more generous expansion of the child tax credit than Trump has. When you and your, ticket mate are not on the same page, that is a problem for a ticket. If J.D. Vance can't credibly speak for Donald Trump, what's he out there talking about?
Right. Garrett Hake, stand by for us. I know when you have new reporting, we'll come back to you during this broadcast. I want to go to my friend Peter Alexander, who's out there in the middle of the spin room somewhere. Peter, give me a sense of what's happening inside the Harris-Walz campaign right now, what they're telling you.
Yeah, Tom, let's walk through a series of items that have been breaking and developing as you two have been speaking right now. We'll start in order. First, we've heard from the communications director from Kamala Harris, a man by the name of Brian Fallon, who immediately after this debate wrapped up, posted on social media, "That was fun. Let's do it again in October." Clearly a message being sent by the Harris campaign for the first time publicly that they would like there to be a second Harris-Trump debate. We're waiting for any response from the Trump campaign. We'll try to bring that to you as soon as we hear about it. Separately, we are hearing from a senior Harris campaign official who is describing this in their words as just a plethora of, how did they say it specifically? They said basically that they had more to work with than they could have possibly imagined, that they had so much that they were hoping to amplify over the course of this night. And most notably, they focus on the topic of abortion. Specifically, it's on that issue where, according to the Harris campaign's dial groups, they say they saw a dramatic gap, one of the biggest gaps they've ever seen, particularly from the voters, women in particular, who were focused on this, saying that they were satisfied, pleased, and supportive of the words they heard from Kamala Harris. It's a message you're going to hear going forward. And then most notably, and perhaps most importantly in terms of the potential influence it will have on those young voters and other voters, Taylor Swift, with 283 million followers on her Instagram account, within the last 5 minutes, has just publicly come out in favor of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, saying that she will be voting for them. She said she came to the conclusion after she saw that there was an AI, an artificial intelligence, false account that suggested she would be supporting Donald Trump. And she said the best way to be transparent about her views was to make it very clear publicly where she stood on this issue. She says, "I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris," she added, "because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them." Just to put that in some context here, remember only a matter of months ago when Joe Biden was the presidential nominee for the Democrats, there was a real concern among Democrats that they weren't getting the support within the young voter community, those first-time voters in many cases, that they weren't energized by a man who was already 81 and would be 86 at the end of a second term if he was to serve. Obviously, Kamala Harris tonight, as you heard, casting herself as a generational candidate. They feel strongly, and certainly with this endorsement from Taylor Swift tonight, that sends a very clear message, first from the debate and separately from her social media, about the value that young people may find in a Harris presidency going forward. And finally, I'll just tell you, based on the takeaways I've had speaking to analysts in this room and hearing from Democrats and Republicans alike, one of the things that frustrated Republicans, frankly, and satisfied a lot of Democrats, Tom, was the sense that Kamala Harris, though she didn't answer some questions, which is receiving some criticism. She did not say, which perhaps was stunning to critics, that America is better off now than it was 4 years ago. They do believe she succeeded in making this a referendum, not so much about the Biden-Harris administration, but about Donald Trump himself. It's one place that we're hearing from a lot of Democrats so far tonight. Back to you.
I'm hearing that as well. Before you
We're back at the Center in Philadelphia and with Chris Christie. So, Governor Christie, you heard the debate, remarkable debate. Bottom line, what you think?
She was exquisitely well prepared. She laid traps, and he chased every rabbit down every hole instead of talking about the things that he should have been talking about. This is the difference between someone who's well prepared and someone who's unprepared. Whoever did debate prep for Donald Trump should be fired. He was not good tonight at all. And what Harris did was what she had to do, which was to prove that she belonged on that stage. She has a voice that wants to try to unite the country. And Donald Trump spent more time talking about people eating pets, people at his rallies, and whether he had more or less than he did about the economy. And that is a huge fail tonight. I think what we're going to see is that Kamala Harris is now being seen by a lot of voters as a potential president. That's what she needed to accomplish tonight. Trump better get to work or he's going to lose this election.
Characteristically blunt assessment from Governor Chris Christie. Thank you, Governor. Mary?
All right, let's go to former DNC Chair Donna Brazile. So, Donna, you have certainly studied many a debate in your career. How does this one compare?
I think it was one of the best debate performances I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot, and I've helped a lot of people prepare for these big moments. She met the moment. She seized the opportunity to tell the American people what she would do during her 4 years. She commanded the issues, and she did not allow the former president to bait her. Instead, she led the way forward. She turned the page, and I think this race is about to get even more interesting now.
We will see if it moves the needle, Donna. Thank you.
All right, over to the other side now. Former RNC Chair Reince Priebus. All right, Reince, the Harris campaign says they want another debate. If you were advising the Trump campaign, would you tell them to do it?
Sure, I would tell him to do it. And the reason is like I said before, Donald Trump's numbers just don't move. I mean, the reality tonight, I know Don is excited, but the truth is Kamala Harris didn't address the most important thing that the American people care about, which is the economy and the cost of living. She had no answers on immigration. She had no answers when she was asked about defunding the police. She had nothing to say about the families that were lost in Afghanistan, which was a true layup. She should have been fact-checked a lot more on some of the things she said in regard to this comment about a bloodbath, which was about the auto industry. So, look, I think a lot of things were not said tonight that she needed to say in order to move the numbers. And I don't think Donald Trump's numbers move at all. They haven't moved at all for months.
Reince Priebus, Donna Brazile, both thank you for your time.
All right. Well, I got to say, again, what a incredible debate, consequential debate, no doubt. I don't know how many votes will actually be moved. I don't know how many persuadable voters are actually out there. But Kamala Harris had a chance here to introduce herself to the country, to people who know who she is but don't know where she stands. Now, you could debate how much she did in terms of the specifics of where she stands, but she stood up there, and I think it was very significant to hear Chris Christie say that she acted like she seemed like she belonged.
Exactly, and Chris was clearly impressed with that. But to your point, John, what matters is what the voters think. Kamala Harris was hurling things against Donald Trump, and he's been convicted in January 6th and everything else she could throw at him. But in the end, right now, he is tied with Kamala Harris. Does this change anything? We've all seen debates where people are very proud of what they did. Hillary Clinton thought she won that debate, many debates in 2016, and she didn't win. So you have to be very careful, and it's very important to see what the voters think.
And look, the Harris campaign certainly thinks that they were, they put him on the defensive. They are going to keep getting out and making this message. She's going to be out there in those critical battlegrounds again later this week. They're so optimistic. They want that second debate. As Rachel said, the message from the campaign tonight, Vice President Harris is ready for a second debate. They're looking for one in October. They say, is Donald Trump, ? One last goading. Okay.
Wow, that is something else. I did not think that in the beginning.
Bottom line, voters out there will change. That's what the polls say. And both of these candidates really trying to present themselves as the agents of change. We'll have to see in the polls to
You're quite hostile.
You're quite hostile. You're quite hostile. You're quite hostile.